The howling wind cut through the air like a knife as Hope Evans stumbled through knee-deep snow, clutching her 5-year-old son Caleb to her chest. Her fingers were numb, her lips blue, and the tears that streaked down her cheeks turned to ice before they could fall. The year was 1873, and the unforgiving Colorado winter had descended without mercy, trapping the young widow and her child in what seemed like a shroud of white death. "Mama," Caleb whispered, his small voice barely audible over the storm, "are we going to die like Pa did?" Hope pressed her cracked lips to her son's forehead, tasting the salt of her own tears. "No, my love, we're going to make it." But even as she said the words, she wondered if they were true. Thomas had been dead for 6 months now, taken by fever in the summer, leaving her with nothing but a small cabin that had burned down 3 days ago, forcing them onto this desperate journey toward the nearest town. Night was falling fast, and with it, the temperature. Hope's legs trembled with each step, her body betraying her determination. Just as her knees began to buckle, she saw a pinprick of orange light in the distance, flickering like a star that had fallen to earth just for them. "Look, Caleb," she murmured, finding new strength. "Light." She pushed forward, each step an agony of hope and determination. As they drew closer, the light revealed itself to be a campfire, and beside it, a tall figure moved with purpose, tending to a coffee pot. A horse nickered softly from where it was hitched to a nearby pine tree. "Hello." Hope called, her voice thin and ragged. "Please, help us." The figure straightened immediately, hand moving to his hip where she knew a gun would be holstered. That was the way of things in these parts: shoot first, ask questions after. But then the hand moved away, and he took a step forward into the light of the fire. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a face that spoke of hard years under the sun. A thick beard covered his jaw, and beneath the brim of his hat, eyes the color of the sky in summer assessed them quickly. "Madam," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to cut through the howling wind, "you've no business being out in this weather." His gaze fell to Caleb, and something in his face softened. "You'll both warm at my fire. Come on now." He moved with the ease of a man accustomed to making quick decisions, crossing the distance between them in long strides. Without asking permission, he took Caleb from her arms, and Hope was too weak to protest. Then he grasped her elbow with his free hand, guiding her toward the campfire. "Name's Quint Xavier," he said, settling Caleb close to the flames. "Most folks call me Quint." "Hope," she replied, collapsing beside her son. "Hope Evans. And this is my son, Caleb," Quint nodded, not asking questions yet, which she appreciated. Instead, he poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Drink. It'll warm you from the inside." As the bitter liquid seared her throat, Hope felt life flowing back into her frozen limbs. Quint had turned his attention to Caleb, wrapping the boy in a thick woolen blanket and checking his small fingers and toes for frostbite. "You're lucky," he said, his tone matter of fact. "Another hour out there and you might have lost some digits, or worse." "Our cabin burned down," Hope explained, not knowing why she felt the need to justify their presence. 3 days ago, we've been trying to reach Silverton." Quint's eyebrows rose. "Silverton's a good 20 miles from here, madam. In this weather, you'd never make it." "We have nowhere else to go," she said simply, too exhausted for pride. Quint studied her for a long moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. "I've got a place. Small ranch about 5 miles from here. Was heading back when the storm picked up, decided to make camp instead of risking it. Come morning, if the snows let up, we'll head there." Hope looked at him, trying to read the stranger's intentions. In the 6 months since Thomas's death, she'd learned that kindness often came with expectations. But there was something in Quint's direct gaze that spoke of honesty, and she had no choice but to trust him. Caleb's life depended on it. "Thank you," she said softly. Quint nodded, then moved to the edge of the camp where saddlebags rested against a log. He returned with jerky and hardtack, simple fare but more welcome than any feast she'd ever had. "Eat," he instructed. "Then sleep. I'll keep watch." As Hope fed Caleb small pieces of the tough jerky, she studied their savior covertly. He moved with the fluid grace of a man comfortable in his own skin, at home in this harsh wilderness. His clothes were worn but well maintained, and the revolver at his hip looked well used but cared for. You have a kind heart, Mr. Xavier, she said finally, when Caleb had fallen asleep against her side. Quint looked up, surprise flashing across his features before he schooled them back into neutrality. Out here, madam, you help folks when they need it. That's just the way of things. Not always, Hope said softly, thinking of the townsfolk who had shunned her after Thomas died, unwilling to help a woman alone. No, he agreed, his eyes suddenly distant. Not always. They fell silent, the crackling of the fire and the howling of the wind the only sounds in the night. Hope felt her eyelids growing heavy, the warmth and the food working their magic on her exhausted body. Sleep, Quint said again, noticing her struggle to stay awake. You're safe now. And for the first time in days, Hope believed it might be true. Morning broke with a pale, watery sunlight filtering through the pines. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed into crystalline white. Hope awoke to find Caleb still sleeping soundly beside her, and Quint already up, tending to his horse. Morning, he said, noticing her stirring. Coffee's hot. Hope sat up, wincing at the stiffness in her limbs. Thank you for everything, Quint nodded, handing her a cup of the steaming brew. Storm's past, we'll leave for the ranch soon as you're ready. Hope glanced at her son, still bundled in Quint's blanket. He needs proper food, warmth. He'll have it, Quint promised. Got plenty of supplies at the ranch. Not used to cooking for little ones, but I reckon I can manage something better than jerky. The idea of this rough cowboy trying to prepare a meal suitable for a child brought a small smile to Hope's lips the first in days. I can cook, she offered. If you provide the ingredients, something flickered in Quint's eyes' appreciation, perhaps. That'd be welcome. They broke camp efficiently, Quint working with the practiced ease of a man who'd done this countless times before. He settled Caleb, still half asleep, in front of him on his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Buck, and then helped Hope up behind him. The journey to Quint's ranch was slow but steady, the horse picking its way carefully through the snow-laden trail. Hope was acutely aware of the warmth of Quint's back against her chest, the solid strength of him as she held on. How'd you end up out here alone? Quint asked after they'd been riding for about an hour. Hope hesitated, but there was no judgment in his tone, only curiosity. My husband Thomas, he was a miner, came out west chasing silver dreams like so many others. We had a small claim, nothing fancy, but we were making do. Then last summer, fever took him. I'm sorry, Quint said, and the simple words held genuine sympathy. After he died, I tried to work the claim, but it was too much. The cabin was ours, though, so we stayed until the fire. What happened? I'm not sure. I woke to the smell of smoke. Barely had time to grab Caleb and a few belongings before the whole place went up. Must have been the stove. It was old, temperamental. Quint nodded. Lucky you got out. Yes, Hope agreed, though luck felt like a distant concept after all they'd lost. They crested a small rise, and suddenly the valley opened before them. Nestled against the side of a hill, protected from the worst of the winds, stood a small ranch. The main house was modest but solid, built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney from which smoke curled lazily into the clear sky. A barn and corral stood to one side, and beyond them, Hope could make out what looked like a small creek. It's not much, Quint said, a hint of defensiveness in his tone. It's beautiful, Hope responded honestly. After days of believing she and Caleb might die in the snow, this small homestead looked like paradise. As they approached, a dog bounded out to meet them, a large, shaggy beast that looked to be part wolf. Hope tensed, but Quint made a low, whistling sound, and the dog immediately calmed, falling into step beside the horse. That's Wolf, Quint explained. Don't worry, he won't hurt you or the boy. Wolf, Hope questioned. That's his name, a small smile quirked the corner of Quint's mouth. Not much for fancy names, I guess. They dismounted in front of the house, Quint lifting Caleb down with gentle hands. The boy was fully awake now, staring wide-eyed at the ranch and particularly at Wolf, who sat patiently, tail sweeping through the snow. Is that a real wolf, mister? Caleb asked, his first words since the previous night. Part wolf, part dog, Quint replied, addressing the child directly. Want to pet him? He's friendly if I tell him you're all right. Caleb looked to his mother for permission. Hope hesitated, but the dog's calm demeanor and Quint's confidence swayed her. All right, but be gentle. Under Quint's supervision, Caleb approached the dog, hand outstretched. Wolf sniffed his fingers, then gave them a quick lick, causing the boy to giggle a sound that brought tears to Hope's eyes. It had been so long since she'd heard her son laugh. The inside of Quint's home was as practical as the man himself. A large fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, with a wooden table and chairs set before it. A rocking chair sat in one corner, and shelves lined the walls, holding books more than Hope would have expected along with practical items. A doorway led to what she presumed was a bedroom, and a ladder against one wall suggested a loft space above. Quint immediately set about building up the fire which had been banked in his absence. "Make yourselves at home," he said. "I'll seat a buck, then we can figure out some food." Left alone, Hope took stock of their situation. They were alive, warm, and safe for now. But what came next? She had no money, no home, and no prospects. They couldn't impose on this stranger's kindness indefinitely. Caleb, seemingly oblivious to his mother's concerns, was exploring the cabin with the resilience of childhood. "Mama, look at all the books," he exclaimed, running his small fingers along the spines. "Can you read one to me later?" "If Mr. Xavier doesn't mind," Hope replied, moving to examine the titles herself. Many were practical guides to farming, animal husbandry, and survival in the wilderness, but there were others that surprised her: volumes of poetry, philosophy, and classic literature. "You like books?" Hope turned to find Quint standing in the doorway, snow melting on his shoulders. She hadn't heard him return. "Yes," she admitted. "Thomas used to tease me about it, said I'd rather read than eat sometimes." Quint's eyes warmed slightly. "My ma was the same way. Taught me to read before I could hardly walk. Said books were windows to worlds we might never see otherwise." The revelation that this rugged cowboy was well-read shifted Hope's perception of him. "She sounds like a wise woman." She was, Quint agreed, a shadow passing over his features. "Been gone 10 years now. Pa followed her 2 years after." "I'm sorry," Hope said, recognizing the familiar pain of loss in his eyes. Quint shrugged, moving past the moment. "Let's get some food in you two. Got beans, bacon, and some dried apples. Not fancy, but it'll fill the belly." "It sounds wonderful," Hope assured him. "May I help?" Together they prepared a simple but hearty meal. Quint seemed almost embarrassed by the sparseness of his provisions, but to Hope and Caleb, the hot food was a feast. As they ate, seated around the wooden table, Hope felt some of the tension begin to leave her body. For the moment, at least, they were safe. "Mr. Xavier," Caleb said suddenly, his small face serious. "Do you have any children?" "Caleb," Hope admonished gently, "that's a personal question." But Quint didn't seem bothered. "No, son, I don't. Never married." "Oh," Caleb considered this. "That's sad. Everyone should have someone." A brief silence fell over the table, broken only by the crackling of the fire. "Well," Quint said finally, "right now I've got you and your ma as guests." "That's something, isn't it?" Caleb nodded earnestly. "Yes, sir, and we've got you, so we're not alone anymore either." Hope felt her cheeks warm at her son's innocent observation. "Caleb, Mr. Xavier is just helping us until the weather improves. We don't want to impose." "It's no imposition," Quint said, his eyes meeting hers across the table. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need." "That's very generous, but nothing," Quint interrupted. "Winter's just getting started. Nowhere safe for you to go until spring unless you've got family nearby." Hope shook her head. "No, no one. Then it's settled, you'll stay." The certainty in his voice left no room for argument, and if Hope was honest with herself, she had no better plan. At least here Caleb would be warm and fed. "Thank you," she said simply. "We'll try not to be a burden." Quint's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You won't be." After the meal, Quint showed them to the small bedroom, insisting they take it while he would sleep in the loft. Hope protested, but he was adamant. "Been sleeping up there half the time anyway," he claimed, though Hope suspected it wasn't true. Closer to the warmth of the chimney. That night, as she lay beside her sleeping son in Quint's bed, surrounded by the unfamiliar scents of tobacco and leather that seemed to permeate the blankets, Hope stared into the darkness. What twist of fate had led them here, to the home of this solitary cowboy with his books and his wolf dog? And what would become of them when winter finally released its grip on the land? Sleep eventually claimed her. but not before her mind had conjured a dozen scenarios for their future, none of which seemed certain except for one thing. They couldn't stay at Quint Xavier's ranch forever. The days began to establish a rhythm. Quint would rise before dawn, tending to his small herd of cattle and the few horses he kept. Hope would awaken to the smell of coffee and the sound of him moving quietly about the cabin, trying not to disturb them. By the end of the first week, she had reorganized his kitchen such as it was and taken over the cooking duties entirely. Quint's initial resistance gave way to appreciation when he tasted her biscuits. "These are better than anything I've had since my ma passed," he admitted, reaching for a third one. Hope smiled, pleased. "It's the least I can do to repay your kindness." "No repayment necessary," he reminded her, but the appreciation in his eyes told her that her efforts were valued nonetheless. Caleb, for his part, had attached himself to Quint with the quick devotion of a child who had lost his father. He followed the cowboy whenever permitted, asking endless questions about the animals, the land, and Quint himself. To Hope's surprise, Quint showed remarkable patience with the boy. He answered his questions thoughtfully, taught him how to feed the chickens, and even carved him a small wooden horse when the snow kept them inside for 2 days straight. "You're good with him," Hope observed one evening as they sat by the fire after Caleb had gone to bed. Quint looked up from the piece of tack he was repairing. "He's a good kid, smart, reminds me of myself at that age, always wanting to know how things work." "He's missed having a man around," Hope said softly. "Thomas was a wonderful father." "Tell me about him," Quint invited, setting aside his work. "Your husband." Hope hesitated, then found herself speaking freely about Thomas, his dreams of striking it rich in the silver mines, his gentle nature, his love for Caleb. Quint listened without interruption, his blue eyes steady on her face. "He sounds like a good man," he said when she finally fell silent. "He was," Hope agreed, wiping away a tear. "I'm sorry, I don't talk about him often. It's still raw, no need to apologize. Grief needs air to heal." The wisdom in his words surprised her. "That's a poetic way of putting it." Quint looked almost embarrassed. "Read it somewhere, I suppose." But Hope was beginning to understand that there was more to Quint Xavier than met the eye. Beneath the rough exterior of the frontier rancher lay a thoughtful, educated mind. "May I ask you something personal?" she ventured. He nodded, wary but willing. "How did someone who clearly loves books and can quote poetry end up alone on a ranch in the Colorado wilderness?" Quint was silent for so long that Hope thought he might not answer. Finally, he sighed, running a hand through his thick hair. "War changes a man," he said simply. "After Gettysburg, I couldn't go back to the life I'd known before. Needed space, silence, found it here. You fought for the Union." "Yes, enlisted in '62, served until the end." Hope thought about the scars she'd glimpsed on his left forearm when he rolled up his sleeves to wash. "Were you wounded?" "Took a bullet at Gettysburg, another at Cold Harbor, was lucky compared to most. And after the war, drifted west. Worked cattle drives, tried my hand at mining, no luck there. Eventually saved enough to buy this place 5 years back." He paused. "It's not much, but it's mine." "It's more than many have," Hope said softly. "A place to belong." Their eyes met across the fire, and something unspoken passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of shared loneliness. Quint cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "Getting late, should turn in." "Yes," Hope agreed, suddenly flustered. "Thank you for sharing your story." As she climbed into bed beside Caleb that night, Hope found herself thinking about Quint not as their rescuer or benefactor, but as a man. A man who had known war and loss, who had carved out a solitary existence in this wild country, but who still read poetry by firelight. It was a dangerous line of thinking, she knew. They were dependent on his charity, and any complication of feelings would only make their eventual departure more difficult. Yet as she drifted toward sleep, his face with those penetrating blue eyes and the beard that didn't quite hide the strong line of his jaw was the last image in her mind. The snowfall that had stranded them at Quint's ranch continued intermittently over the next few weeks. December deepened into January of 1874, and with it came the realization that they would be staying through Christmas. "We should do something special," Hope suggested to Quint one morning as they watched Caleb playing with Wolf in the snow. "For Caleb's sake." Christmas was always important to Thomas. Quint looked uncertain. Haven't celebrated Christmas properly in years. All the more reason to do so now, Hope insisted. Nothing elaborate, just a special meal, perhaps a small gift for Caleb. And decorations, Caleb chimed in, having overheard. Can we have a tree, Mr. Quint? Pa always brought one in. Quint's expression softened at the boy's enthusiasm. Reckon we could manage that. The next day, Quint took Caleb with him to select a suitable pine, leaving Hope alone in the cabin. It was the first time she'd been truly alone since their arrival, and she took the opportunity to do some exploring. In a chest at the foot of Quint's bed, now hers, she found neatly folded linens, a few pieces of worn clothing, and at the very bottom, a daguerreotype. Curiosity overcame her scruples, and she carefully lifted it out. The image showed a younger Quint, perhaps 20, standing proudly in a Union uniform. Beside him sat a beautiful woman with his same blue eyes his mother, Hope guessed, and a stern-faced older man who could only be his father. They looked prosperous, educated, not at all what she would have expected given Quint's current circumstances. She was so absorbed in the photograph that she didn't hear the door open. A blast of cold air announced Quint's return, and Hope hurriedly returned the daguerreotype to the chest. Found a good one, Quint called from the main room. Caleb picked it out. Hope emerged from the bedroom to find Caleb dancing excitedly around a small but perfectly shaped pine tree. It's beautiful, she said, genuine pleasure warming her voice. The perfect size. Told you Ma would like it, Caleb said triumphantly to Quint, who smiled in response. That you did, partner. The ease with which Caleb had adopted Quint as a kind of surrogate father figure both warmed and worried Hope. What would happen to her son's heart when they eventually had to leave? But such concerns were pushed aside in the flurry of Christmas preparations. Hope taught Caleb how to string popcorn and cranberries for the tree, while Quint surprised them both by producing a small box of glass ornaments from the attic relics. He explained briefly from his mother. On Christmas Eve, after Caleb had gone to bed with strict instructions to stay there until morning, Hope and Quint sat by the fire, putting the finishing touches on their modest celebrations. I made him a slingshot, Quint said, showing Hope the carefully crafted toy. And found some marbles in town last time I was there. Not much, but it's perfect, Hope assured him, touched by his thoughtfulness. He'll love it. And for you, Quint added, surprising her by pulling a small package from behind his back. Just something simple. Hope hadn't expected a gift for herself and felt embarrassed that she had nothing to offer him in return. Quint, you shouldn't have. Go on, open it, he encouraged, a rare smile softening his features. With trembling fingers, Hope unwrapped the small parcel to find a delicate silver locket. Oh, she breathed, stunned by the unexpected luxury. Bought it in town years back, Quint explained hastily. For my ma, but she passed before I could give it to her. Been sitting in a drawer ever since. Thought you might have use for it. Hope opened the locket to find it empty, waiting for memories to be preserved within. It's beautiful, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you. It's nothing, he insisted, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. It's everything, Hope countered softly, but I have nothing for you. Quint's eyes held hers for a long moment. Having you and Caleb here, it's been good. Cabin's felt more like a home these past weeks than it has in years. That's gift enough. The sincerity in his voice made Hope's heart ache with a sweet pain. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his cheek. A brief touch of gratitude and something more that she wasn't ready to name. Quint froze, his eyes widening in surprise, and Hope immediately pulled back, mortified by her boldness. I'm sorry, she began, but he shook his head. Don't be, he said, his voice rough with emotion. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently touching her cheek. Hope. The sound of her name on his lips sent a shiver through her. For a breathless moment, she thought he might kiss her, and God help her, she wanted him to. But then he pulled back, the moment broken. It's late, he said, rising abruptly. Should get some rest before that boy of yours wakes up at dawn. Yes, Hope agreed, confusion and disappointment warring within her. Good night, Quint. Good night, Hope. Merry Christmas. As she prepared for bed, Hope touched the silver locket now hanging around her neck. What was happening between them? And more importantly, what would come of it when winter finally released its grip? and they could no longer justify their presence in his home. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, with sunlight sparkling off the snow-covered landscape. Caleb was indeed up at dawn, bursting with excitement over the small tree and the gifts beneath it. His joy at the slingshot and marbles was everything Quint could have hoped for, and Hope found herself watching the cowboy's face as much as her son's, touched by the genuine pleasure he took in Caleb's happiness. The tension from the previous night seemed to have dissipated in the light of day, or at least been set aside for the sake of the holiday. After a breakfast of flapjacks and bacon, they spent the morning together, with Quint teaching Caleb how to properly use his new slingshot, with strict rules about not aiming at anything living, and Hope preparing a feast from their limited provisions. It was, Hope reflected as they sat down to dinner, the most peaceful Christmas she'd had in years. Even with Thomas, there had always been the strain of making ends meet, the constant worry about the future. Here, in this moment, there was only warmth and companionship. "Best Christmas ever," Caleb declared as he helped himself to a second serving of the rabbit stew Hope had prepared. "Isn't it, Mama?" "It is indeed," Hope agreed, her eyes meeting Quint's across the table. "Thank you." "No need for thanks," Quint said, but the warmth in his eyes told her he was pleased. After dinner, as Caleb played with his new toys by the fire, Quint motioned Hope to join him on the porch. Wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, she followed him into the crisp winter air. "Wanted to show you something," he said, pointing to the western sky where the sun was setting in a spectacular display of pink and gold. "Best view in Colorado, some say." Hope gasped softly at the beauty of it. They might be right. They stood in companionable silence, watching as the colors deepened and then slowly faded to the soft blue of early evening. "Been thinking," Quint said finally, his breath fogging in the cold air. "About spring." Hope tensed, knowing what was coming. This was it, the gentle reminder that their arrangement was temporary. "I've been thinking about it too," she said quickly. "We'll be out of your way as soon as the pass is clear. I'm sure I can find work in Silverton, perhaps as a cook, or..." "That's not what I meant," Quint interrupted. "Been thinking about expanding the herd come spring. Ranch this size could support twice the cattle I've got now, but I'd need help." Hope looked at him, confused. "Help? A partner," Quint clarified, his eyes steady on her face. "Someone with a stake in the place, in its future." Understanding dawned slowly. "Quint, what are you saying?" He took a deep breath as if steeling himself. "I'm saying I don't want you and Caleb to leave come spring. I'm saying this place could be yours too if you wanted it." "You're offering me a job?" Hope asked, trying to clarify. "No, Hope." Quint stepped closer, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. "I'm asking if you'd consider becoming my wife." The words hung in the air between them, as tangible as the fog of their breath in the cold. Hope stared at him, shock rendering her momentarily speechless. "I know it's sudden," Quint continued, filling the silence. "And I know you're still grieving Thomas. I wouldn't expect. That is, we could take things slow, but I've grown fond of you both and the thought of this place without you in it." "Quint," Hope finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to answer now," he assured her. "Think on it. Talk to Caleb. I just wanted you to know where I stand." Hope nodded, her mind whirling with possibilities. Marriage to Quint would provide security for her and Caleb, a home, a future. But was that enough reason to say yes? What of love? Yet as she looked into his eyes, she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her whenever he was near. It wasn't the passionate love she'd felt for Thomas in the beginning, but perhaps something steadier, something that could grow deeper with time. "I'll think about it," she promised. Quint nodded, satisfaction and hope mingling in his expression. "That's all I ask." As January gave way to February, Hope found herself studying Quint with new eyes, weighing his proposal in her heart. He didn't press her for an answer, giving her the space to come to her own decision. But she noticed small changes in his behavior. He was more open, more talkative, sharing stories from his past that she sensed few had heard. She learned that he came from a well-to-do Boston family, that he'd been studying law before the war changed everything. That he'd had a younger sister who died of scarlet fever when he was 12, a loss that had shaped him deeply. That he'd tried to return to Boston after the war, but found he couldn't bear the confines of city life or his parents' expectations after what he'd seen and done. In turn, Hope shared more of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her dreams of becoming a teacher before she met and fell in love with Thomas, the struggle to adapt to frontier life. These conversations, often held in the quiet evenings after Caleb was asleep, created a bridge between them, a connection that deepened with each passing day. One evening, as a February blizzard howled around the cabin, Caleb asked the question Hope had been dreading. "Mama, when are we leaving Mr. Quint's house?" Hope exchanged a glance with Quint, who was whittling by the fire. "Well," she began carefully, "that depends on a few things." "What things?" Caleb persisted. Hope took a deep breath. "Mr. Quint has asked if we might want to stay here permanently, if I might consider becoming his wife." Caleb's eyes widened. "Like you were Pa's wife?" "Yes, something like that." "Would that make Mr. Quint my new Pa?" Hope hesitated, but Quint answered for her. "Not to replace your real Pa, Caleb. No one could do that, but I'd be honored to help take care of you and your ma if you'd both be agreeable." Caleb considered this seriously, his small face scrunched in concentration. "Would we stay here, with Wolf and Buck and the chickens?" "Yes," Quint confirmed. "This would be your home." "And Mama wouldn't cry at night anymore." Hope felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. She hadn't realized Caleb had heard her quiet tears in the dark. "I'd certainly do my best to make sure of that," Quint said, his voice gentle. Caleb nodded decisively. "Then I think it's a good idea." "Well," Hope said, trying to keep her tone light despite the emotion welling within her, "I'm glad you approve, but it's a big decision, one that your mama needs to think about very carefully. Have you been thinking about it?" Caleb asked innocently. "Yes," Hope admitted, meeting Quint's gaze across the room. "I've thought of little else." "And," Quint prompted softly, the hope in his eyes unmistakable. In that moment, looking at this man who had saved them from the storm, who had opened his home and his heart, who treated her son with such gentle patience, Hope knew her answer. "Yes," she said simply. "If you're sure, then yes, I'll marry you, Quint." The joy that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He crossed the room in 2 strides and took her hands in his. "I'm sure," he said firmly. "More sure than I've been of anything in a long time." He bent and kissed her then, a gentle, tentative kiss that held the promise of deeper passion to come. Hope felt a flutter of anticipation, of rightness, that confirmed her decision. "Does this mean you're going to kiss a lot now?" Caleb asked, his nose wrinkled in childish disgust. Hope broke away from Quint, laughing. "Perhaps occasionally." "Well, I'm not watching," Caleb declared, turning his attention back to the wooden horse Quint had carved him. Quint's arm slipped around Hope's waist, drawing her close to his side. "We'll try to spare your sensibilities," he promised the boy, but the look he gave Hope held no such assurance. With the decision made, practical considerations took precedence. The nearest preacher was in Silverton, and the mountain passes wouldn't be clear until April at the earliest. "We could wait until then," Quint suggested. "Do it proper with witnesses and such." But Hope, having committed to this new path, was reluctant to delay. "In the eyes of God, all that matters is our vows to each other," she said. "We could speak them now, just the 3 of us, and make it official with the preacher when the snow clears." Quint considered this, then nodded. "If that's what you want." "It is," Hope confirmed. "I want us to be a family, not just waiting to become one." And so, on a clear February evening with stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky, Hope and Quint spoke their vows before the fireplace, with Caleb and Wolf as their only witnesses. The words were simple but heartfelt, promises of fidelity, support, and respect. "With this ring I thee wed," Quint said, slipping a simple gold band onto Hope's finger, his mother's, he explained, sent west with him when he left Boston. "With this heart I thee wed," Hope responded, having no ring to offer in return. Quint's hands were gentle as he cupped her face. "May I kiss the bride?" "You may," Hope whispered. And as his lips met hers, she felt the last of her doubts dissolve like snow in spring sunshine. That night, after Caleb was asleep in the loft that would now be his bedroom alone, Hope and Quint came together as husband and wife. There was awkwardness at first as they navigated the newness of each other, but also tenderness, and to Hope's surprise, a passion that left her breathless. Afterward, lying in his arms, Hope marveled at the strange turns life could take. 3 months ago, she had been a desperate widow facing death in the snow. Now she was a wife again, with a home and a future stretched out before her. Any regrets? Quint asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. Hope considered the question honestly. No, she said finally. It's not the life I imagined, but I'm beginning to think it might be better than anything I could have planned. Quint's arms tightened around her. I'll do right by you and Caleb, Hope, that's a promise. I know you will, she replied, believing it completely. Spring came to the mountains in fits, and starts warm days followed by sudden squalls, the snow gradually retreating up the slopes. By early April, the trail to Silverton was passable, and Quint prepared to make the journey to town for supplies and to officially register their marriage with the preacher. I should come with you, Hope argued. We should be married properly together. The trail's still treacherous in places, Quint countered. Rather not risk it with you and Caleb, next time when the path is clearer. Reluctantly, Hope agreed, but as she watched him ride away, a sense of unease settled over her. It was the first time they'd been separated since that fateful night in the snow, and she was surprised by how empty the cabin felt without him, despite Caleb's energetic presence. When's Pa coming back? Caleb asked that evening as Hope tucked him into bed. He had taken to calling Quint Pa almost immediately after their informal marriage, and though Quint had initially seemed startled by it, he now answered to the title with evident pride. In a few days, Hope assured him. It's a long ride to town and back. Will he bring me candy? Caleb asked hopefully. Hope smiled. If you're good, perhaps he might. I'll be extra good, Caleb promised, snuggling down under his quilt. I know you will, Hope said, kissing his forehead. Good night, my love. Night, Mama. As predicted, Quint returned 3 days later, his saddlebags bulging with supplies and a small package of candy for Caleb. But there was a tension in his manner that Hope noticed immediately. What's wrong? She asked once Caleb was occupied with his treat. Quint hesitated, then sighed. News in town. Group of men been causing trouble up and down the valley. Robbery, some say worse. Hope's hand went to her throat. Here it's so isolated. That's the appeal for their kind, Quint said grimly. Few lawmen, scattered homesteads, easy pickings. Should we be worried? Quint shrugged, trying to appear casual, though Hope could see the concern in his eyes. Probably not. They seem to be working the southern end of the valley and we're well north, just something to be aware of. Despite his reassurances, Hope noticed Quint took to carrying his rifle when he went out to check the cattle, and he made sure the revolver was loaded and within reach at night. His vigilance both comforted and concerned her. As April bloomed into May, and the threat seemed to recede with no reports of the outlaws moving northward, life at the ranch settled into a pleasant rhythm. Hope planted a vegetable garden, Caleb helped with the chickens, and learned to ride the gentle mare Quint had brought back from town specifically for him. And Quint worked from dawn till dusk, expanding the herd and repairing winter damage to the fences. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and pink, Caleb often falling asleep against Quint's side before the light had fully faded. He loves you, Hope observed one such evening, watching as Quint carefully carried the sleeping boy inside to his bed. Feelings mutual, Quint replied when he returned, settling beside her on the porch step. He's a good boy. Smart too, been thinking we should start his schooling come fall. You'd teach him, Hope asked, surprised, figured we both would. Between your knack with letters and my passable mathematics, we could give him a decent foundation. The casual way he included her in these plans for Caleb's future warmed Hope's heart. I'd like that, she said softly. Quint's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her against his side. Been thinking about other things too. Oh, Hope raised an eyebrow, noting the mischievous glint in his eye. What sort of things, Mr. Xavier? The sort that involve us making proper use of our private quarters, he murmured, his beard tickling her ear as he leaned in close. If my wife is amenable, that is. Hope laughed softly, turning to press a kiss to his lips. Your wife is very amenable indeed. Later, lying in the darkness with Quint's steady breathing beside her, Hope allowed herself to imagine a future stretching out before them, watching Caleb grow into a man under Quint's guidance. Perhaps more children joining their family, the ranch prospering under their joint care. It was a good vision, one that filled her with contentment and hope. But fate, she was learning, rarely followed the paths we planned for it. The trouble came on a clear June morning. Quint had ridden out at dawn to check on a heifer that was close to calving, promising to be back by midday. Hope busied herself with household tasks, while Caleb played with Wolf in the yard, under strict instructions to stay within sight of the cabin. The sun had just reached its zenith when Hope heard Wolf's warning bark, a sound she had come to recognize as different from his normal vocalizations. Setting aside the bread she was kneading, she moved to the window. 3 riders were approaching the cabin, strangers on dust-covered horses. They rode with the easy confidence of men accustomed to commanding respect or fear. "Caleb," Hope called sharply, "come inside. Now." The boy looked up from his play, noticed the approaching riders, and ran immediately to the porch, Wolf at his heels. Hope met him at the door, ushering him inside. "Go up to the loft," she instructed, trying to keep her voice calm. "Stay there until I call you." "Is it the bad men Pa told you about?" Caleb asked, his eyes wide. "I don't know, love," Hope answered honestly, "but I want you safe until Pa gets home." Once Caleb was safely in the loft, Hope moved to the cabinet where Quint kept his revolver. Her fingers closed around the cold metal, a weight she had learned to handle during their target practice sessions over the past months. Taking a deep breath, she positioned herself by the window, out of direct sight but with a clear view of the yard. The riders had reached the cabin and were dismounting, their movements unhurried but purposeful. "Hello, the house," called the leader, a tall man with a scar running from his left eye to his jawline. "Anyone home?" Hope remained silent, watching. "Might as well come on out," the man continued, his tone conversational but with an underlying edge. "Saw the boy playing. Know someone's here." Realizing there was no use in pretending the cabin was empty, Hope moved to the door, the revolver hidden in the folds of her skirt. Wolf stood beside her, hackles raised, a low growl emanating from his throat. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" she called through the closed door, proud of the steadiness in her voice. "Just passing through, madam," the scarred man replied. "Looking for a meal and maybe some fresh water for our horses." "Be willing to pay." It was a reasonable request, one that frontier hospitality would normally demand be granted. But something about the men's demeanor, a certain watchfulness, a predatory quality to their stance, made Hope wary. "My husband will be back shortly," she said, a deliberate warning in her words. "He's just checking the herd." "No rush," the man said easily. "Happy to wait for him. Sure is hot out here in the sun, though." Hope hesitated, torn between the ingrained courtesy of offering shelter and the instinctive caution that kept her hand on the revolver. Before she could decide, Wolf made the choice for her, slipping past her legs as she cracked the door and charging at the visitors, teeth bared. "Wolf, no." Hope cried, but it was too late. The shot rang out before she even saw the gun in the scarred man's hand. Wolf yelped once, a high, pained sound that cut straight to Hope's heart, and crumpled to the ground. "Nasty beast," the shooter commented, holstering his weapon with practiced ease. "Now, madam, about that hospitality." "You killed my dog," Hope said, shock giving way to anger. "Self-defense," the man countered, unrepentant. "Now, are you going to invite us in, or do we need to invite ourselves?" In that moment, Hope knew with cold certainty that these were indeed the outlaws Quint had heard about in town. And she knew, with equal certainty, that if she allowed them into the cabin, neither she nor Caleb would survive to see Quint's return. "I think you should leave," she said firmly, bringing the revolver into view. Now, the scarred man's eyes narrowed, but a slow smile spread across his face. Well, the lady's got spirit and a gun." He glanced at his companions. "Boys, looks like we might have some fun after all." "I know how to use this," Hope warned, cocking the hammer. "My husband made sure of that." "I'm sure he did," the man agreed, taking a step forward. "But the question is, can you bring yourself to pull that trigger, to take a man's life?" Hope's hand trembled slightly, but she kept the gun leveled at his chest. "To protect my son. Yes." Something flickered in the man's eyes, calculation, perhaps, or the first hint of doubt, but before he could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. "Sounds like your husband's returning," he observed, his casual tone belied by the sudden tension in his stance. "Might be time for us to go, boys. Don't want to overstay our welcome." Relief flooded through Hope, but she maintained her position, the revolver steady. "I think that would be best." The three men mounted their horses with unhurried movements that nonetheless conveyed a certain wariness. The scarred leader tipped his hat to Hope. "Another time, perhaps," he said, and there was a promise in his words that sent a chill down Hope's spine. They rode away just as Quint came galloping into the yard, his rifle already in hand. He pulled up sharply at the sight of Wolf's body, then dismounted in a fluid motion, his eyes scanning for Hope. "Are you all right?" he demanded, striding toward her. "Caleb." "We're fine," Hope assured him, the revolver finally lowering as her hand began to shake in earnest. "Caleb's in the loft, but Wolf—" "I saw," Quint said grimly. "Who were they?" Hope described the encounter as best she could, watching as Quint's expression darkened with each detail. "The Matthews gang," he said when she had finished. "Has to be. They've been working their way north. Didn't think they'd reach us this soon." He knelt beside Wolf, checking for signs of life, but the dog lay still and silent. "Good boy," Quint murmured, stroking the shaggy fur one last time. "Did his job, protected his family." Hope felt tears welling in her eyes. "He did. If he hadn't charged them, I don't know what would have happened." Quint stood, his face set in hard lines. "We need to be ready. They might come back." "Do you think they will? Men like that?" Quint shook his head. "They don't like being denied, and now they know there's a woman and child here, relatively isolated." "What do we do?" Hope asked, fear gripping her heart again. Quint's eyes met hers, steady and determined. "We prepare, and if necessary, we fight." The rest of the day was spent in grim preparation. Quint buried Wolf beneath the large pine tree where the dog had often napped in the summer heat, while Hope explained what had happened to a tearful Caleb. "Wolf saved us," she told him, holding him close. "He was very brave." "Like Pa's friends in the war?" Caleb asked, hiccuping through his tears. "Yes, just like that," Hope agreed, thinking how quickly children adapted to the harsh realities of frontier life, where death was never far away. After the burial, Quint brought extra ammunition into the cabin, checked and rechecked his weapons, and boarded up the smaller windows. Hope watched these preparations with growing unease. "Should we leave?" she asked that night as they lay in bed, Caleb having fallen asleep between them after refusing to stay alone in the loft. "Go to town until this passes." Quint was silent for a long moment. "Thought about it," he admitted finally, "but the trail to town is exposed in places. If they're watching, we'd be vulnerable, and we'd be leaving the ranch undefended." "The ranch can be rebuilt," Hope pointed out. "We can't." "True enough," Quint sighed, running a hand through his hair. "But there's no guarantee they'd come back. Might have just been passing through, looking for easy pickings." "You don't believe that," Hope said softly. "No," Quint agreed, "I don't. Something in that leader's eyes. He's not the type to let a challenge go." They fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Hope spoke again. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Quint's hand found hers in the darkness. "Together," he echoed. "Get some sleep now. I'll take first watch." The next few days passed in a state of tense vigilance. Quint never ventured far from the cabin, and he made sure Hope kept the revolver with her at all times. Caleb was not allowed to play outside unless one of them was with him, a restriction he bore with surprising patience after Quint explained about bad men who might want to hurt them. On the third night after the encounter, as they sat at dinner, Caleb suddenly asked, "Are we going to die, Pa?" The bluntness of the question startled both adults. Quint set down his fork, his expression serious as he considered how to respond. "No, son," he said finally. "Not if I have anything to say about it. Your ma and I are doing everything we can to keep us all safe." "But the bad men might come back," Caleb persisted, "like they did to Jimmy's family." Hope and Quint exchanged a glance of confusion. "Jimmy?" Hope asked. "Who's Jimmy Love?" "A boy I knew in the mining camp," Caleb explained. "Bad men came to his house. They hurt his ma and took all their things. Jimmy had to hide in a cupboard." Hope felt a chill at this revelation. She had no idea Caleb had witnessed or even heard about such violence in their previous life. "That won't happen here," Quint said firmly, reaching across the table to place his hand over Caleb's small one. I promise you that. Because you're stronger than Jimmy's pa? Caleb asked, a child's simple logic. A shadow crossed Quint's face. I don't know about that. But I do know that I'll do whatever it takes to protect you and your ma. That's what a family does, they look out for each other. Caleb nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer, and returned to his meal. But Hope could see the weight of responsibility settling even more heavily on Quint's shoulders. Later, after Caleb was asleep, Hope found Quint on the porch, his rifle across his knees as he stared out into the darkness. You can't stay awake forever, she said softly, sitting beside him. You need to rest too. I'll rest when I know you're both safe, he replied, his eyes never leaving the shadowy landscape. Hope leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. You're a good man, Quint Xavier. I want you to know that, whatever happens. Quint's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her closer. Nothing's going to happen, he insisted. We'll get through this. But they both knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep. The attack, when it came, was not the stealthy night raid they had feared, but a bold frontal assault in broad daylight. 5 riders this time, led by the scarred man, approaching the cabin without attempt at concealment. Quint spotted them from the barn where he was working. Hope. He shouted, his voice carrying across the yard. Get inside. Now, Hope, who had been hanging laundry with Caleb helping by handing her clothespins, didn't hesitate. Scooping up Caleb, she ran for the cabin, her heart pounding in her ears. Quint met them at the door, his rifle already in hand. Get Caleb to the loft, he instructed tersely. Keep the revolver with you. What are you going to do? Hope asked, fear making her voice sharp. Talk to them first, Quint replied, his eyes hard. See what they want, though I think we both know. Be careful, Hope pleaded, pressing a quick kiss to his lips before hurrying Caleb up to the loft. From the small window there, she watched as Quint stepped onto the porch, rifle held ready but not aimed directly at the approaching riders. The men halted a short distance from the cabin. That's far enough, Quint called out, his voice carrying clearly through the open window. The scarred man raised his hands in a gesture of mock surrender. No need for hostility, friend. Just stopped by to continue our conversation with your lovely wife. My wife says you've already overstayed your welcome, Quint replied evenly. I suggest you move on. Well now, that's not very neighborly. The scarred man's voice had hardened. Especially when we've ridden all this way. Boys are thirsty, horses need water. River's half a mile east, Quint said. Help yourselves. A tense silence fell, broken only by the nervous stamping of horses' hooves. Hope held her breath, one arm around Caleb while her other hand gripped the revolver. I don't think you understand your situation, the scarred man said finally, all pretense at friendliness gone. There's 5 of us, one of you, maybe 2 if we count the woman. Those aren't good odds. Better than you might think, Quint countered. I was at Gettysburg. Know how to handle myself. The revelation seemed to give the outlaw leader pause. War veterans, especially those who had survived major battles, were not men to be taken lightly. Listen, the scarred man said, changing tactics. We don't want trouble. Just looking for supplies, maybe some cash if you've got it. Let us have what we need and we'll be on our way. No one gets hurt. Can't do that, Quint replied steadily. Everything we have we need, the leader's face darkened. Then you leave us no choice. What happened next unfolded with the terrible clarity of a nightmare. The scarred man reached for his gun, but Quint was faster, firing a shot that caught the leader in the shoulder. The other men returned fire immediately, bullets splintering the wood of the porch as Quint dove for cover. Hope watched in horror as Quint rolled behind a rain barrel, returning fire with deadly precision. One of the outlaws fell from his horse, then another. But the remaining 3, including the wounded leader, had dismounted and were using their horses for cover as they continued to shoot. Mama, Caleb whimpered, burying his face against her side. I'm scared. I know, love, Hope whispered, her eyes never leaving the scene below. But Pa will protect us, and if necessary, so will I. The gunfire continued, a deafening exchange that seemed to stretch endlessly. Then suddenly, Hope saw Quint stagger, a bloom of red appearing on his shirt near his ribs. No, she breathed, her heart seizing in her chest. Despite the wound, Quint maintained his position, firing steadily. Another outlaw fell, leaving only the scarred leader and one companion. They seemed to confer briefly, then began to retreat toward the cover of the nearby trees, firing as they went. Hope lost sight of Quint as he moved around the side of the cabin, trying to get a better angle. The shooting had become more sporadic now, the outlaws clearly on the defensive. "Stay here," Hope instructed Caleb, placing him in the furthest corner of the loft. "Don't move until I come for you, no matter what you hear. Promise me." "I promise," Caleb whispered, his face pale with fear. Hope descended the ladder quickly, the revolver clutched in her hand. If Quint was wounded, he would need help, and if the worst had happened. She refused to complete the thought. As she reached the main room of the cabin, a shot rang out much closer than the others, followed by the sound of breaking glass. One of the outlaws had circled around to the back of the cabin and was trying to enter through a window. Hope raised the revolver, her hands surprisingly steady as she aimed at the window. A moment later, a man's arm appeared, followed by his head and shoulders as he attempted to climb through. Without hesitation, Hope pulled the trigger. The outlaw fell backward with a cry of pain, disappearing from view. Hope had no time to consider what she had done, whether she had killed him or merely wounded him, because at that moment the front door burst open and Quint staggered in, his shirt now soaked with blood. "Quint," Hope cried, rushing to his side. "I'm all right," he gasped, though his pallor belied the words. "Just a graze, the others." "One tried to come through the back window," Hope reported, helping him to a chair. "I shot him." "I don't know if you did what you had to," Quint interrupted, wincing as he seated himself. "Check the windows. Make sure they're not trying another approach." Hope did as he asked, circling the cabin cautiously. Through the front window, she could see two bodies lying motionless in the yard. Of the others, including the one she had shot, there was no sign. "I think they've gone," she reported, returning to Quint. "Let me see that wound." Quint submitted to her examination with stoic silence. The bullet had indeed grazed his side, carving a bloody furrow through flesh but not penetrating deeply. Still, it was serious enough to require immediate attention. "Caleb," Hope called once she was sure it was safe, "you can come down now, I need your help." Together, they cleaned and bandaged Quint's wound, Caleb showing remarkable composure as he fetched water and clean rags at his mother's direction. Once Quint was patched up and resting on their bed, Hope turned her attention to the bodies in the yard. "Leave them," Quint advised when she mentioned dealing with them. "If their friends come back, they'll see what awaits them." Hope shuddered at the coldness of this logic, but couldn't deny its practicality. "Do you think they will come back?" Quint shook his head. "Not today. They've lost at least 3 men, maybe 4, and their leader's wounded. But eventually, if they're as stubborn as I think maybe, then we should go," Hope insisted. "As soon as you're able to travel, to town or further if necessary." Quint was silent for a long moment, his face troubled. "This is our home," he said finally. "Everything I've built over the past 5 years, everything I hope to leave to Caleb someday." "It's just a place," Hope argued. "Our family is what matters. You, me, Caleb, we can build again somewhere else." Quint reached for her hand, squeezing it weakly. "You're right, of course, just hard to think about starting over again." "We've both done it before," Hope reminded him, "and this time we'll do it together." The decision made, they began preparations for departure as soon as Quint was strong enough to move around, which took 3 days. During that time, Hope remained vigilant, but there was no sign of the outlaws returning. On the 4th day, they loaded their most valuable possessions onto the wagon, along with enough provisions for the journey to Silverton and beyond. Quint insisted on burying the dead outlaws before they left, a task Hope helped with despite her revulsion. "Can't leave them for the scavengers," Quint explained grimly. "Not right, even for their kind." As they prepared to depart, Hope took a final look at the cabin that had been their refuge and then their home. So many memories were contained within those log walls, their first Christmas together, the night they had spoken their vows, countless moments of growing love and contentment. "We'll build something better," Quint promised, seeing the emotion on her face. "Somewhere safer." "I know we will," Hope agreed, smiling through her tears. "As long as we're together, that's all that matters." Caleb, excited by the prospect of adventure despite the circumstances, bounced impatiently on the wagon seat. "Are we going now, Pa? Ma?" "Yes, son," Quint confirmed, climbing up beside him with a wince of pain. "We're going now." Hope took her place on the other side of Caleb, her hand finding Quint's across their son's shoulders. As the wagon rolled away from the ranch, she felt not despair, but hope, the same hope that had sustained her through the darkest night in the snow, when a stranger had offered warmth and shelter. That stranger was now her husband, that night the beginning of a journey that would continue far beyond these mountains. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, Hope, Quint, and Caleb. A family forged in adversity, bound by love, moving forward into the future with courage and determination. The wagon disappeared over the ridge, leaving behind the small ranch in the valley. But they carried with them the most important thing they had found there: each other. 5 years later, in a green valley nestled among the gentler slopes of the Colorado foothills, a prosperous farm stood as testament to new beginnings. Fruit trees, still young but already bearing, lined the drive to a sturdy 2-story house painted white with blue shutters. Fields of wheat and corn stretched behind it, and a large barn housed cattle, horses, and chickens. On the wide front porch, Hope Xavier sat in a rocking chair, her hands busy with mending while she kept an eye on the 2 small children playing in the yard: 3-year-old Sophia with her mother's golden hair, and 18-month-old James, named for Quint's father, toddling after his sister with determined steps. A shout of laughter drew her attention to the nearby paddock, where Quint was teaching Caleb, now 10, the finer points of breaking a young horse. The boy had grown tall and strong, with his stepfather's confidence and his birth father's gentle nature the best of both men, Hope often thought. The memories of that terrible day at their mountain ranch had faded somewhat with time, though Hope knew Quint still had nightmares occasionally. They had learned later that the scarred leader of the outlaws known as Matthews, as Quint had guessed, had been captured and hanged in Denver the year after their encounter. The knowledge had brought a sense of closure, if not peace. Their new farm, closer to civilization and with neighbors within shouting distance, offered the security they had sought. But more importantly, it provided the foundation for the life they had built together, a life richer and more fulfilling than Hope could have imagined on that snowy night when she had stumbled toward a stranger's campfire with Caleb in her arms. "Penny for your thoughts," Quint said, coming up the porch steps while Caleb continued working with the horse under his watchful eye. Hope smiled up at him, the love she felt reflected in his eyes. "Just thinking how fortunate we are, how far we've come." Quint nodded, understanding as he always did. "From a snowstorm and a campfire to this," he agreed, gesturing to the thriving farm around them. "Quite a journey. One I wouldn't change," Hope said firmly, "not even the difficult parts." Quint bent to kiss her, a gesture that still sent warmth spreading through her after all these years. "Nor would I," he murmured against her lips, "not one step of it." As the sun began to set behind the distant mountains, casting the valley in gold and shadow, the Xavier family gathered on the porch of their home, Quint with his arm around Hope's shoulders, Caleb proudly recounting his progress with the horse, the 2 little ones clambering for attention. Their voices mingled with laughter and love, rising into the evening air. And if the spirit of a faithful wolf dog watched over them from somewhere beyond, perhaps he too was content with how things had turned out for the woman who had once been alone in the snow with her son, and the cowboy who had said, "You'll both warm at my fire."